Okay. And Dan, do you want to just move us on to the first slide, please? Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for joining us today. This is the Local Plan Update webinar. This is the very first one that we're hosting. It's very exciting for us to be trying out new formats like this one. This particular webinar is focused on the carbon reduction topic, and is an opportunity for you to hear a short presentation and ask questions of the team. Before we begin the webinar properly, I'd just like to outline some housekeeping arrangements for this section and to explain the format. So firstly, please note that this webinar is being recorded and is being uploaded to YouTube for the benefit of others. So that means, yeah, that you're being recorded, or at least this webinar is. So if you have an issue with that, obviously, please feel free to leave now. All attendee microphones and videos have been turned off and will remain turned off. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen, and which is a lot easier for us to handle rather than the chat function. So if you could use the Q&A function, that would be appreciated. We will attempt to answer the questions verbally, but if we run out of time, we'll make a record and email you the responses that we've had, we've been able to give. So in terms of the format, we're looking at roughly a 20-minute presentation, followed by a Q&A session for you to ask questions in the Q&A box with the panel. I just want to introduce you to the panel today. So we've got Martin Elliott, who's the head of service for strategic planning. Myself, Adam Harvat, the group manager for policy and plans. We've got Helen Miller, who is a principal planner in the policy and plans team, and Daniel Golland, who's a senior planner in the policy and plans team. So if we could just go to the next slide, please, Dan. Excellent, thank you. So just by way of introduction, what is this consultation about? Well, we're consulting on the local plan update, which will eventually contain a suite of new planning policies to help us hopefully tackle the climate emergency. And this is the earliest stage of consultation, known as a scoping consultation. And this is about seeking agreement on what broad topics should be included in the plan. But it's also about ideas and options rather than strict, sort of literal strict policies at this stage. Broadly speaking, what we're looking for from this consultation is an understanding of whether people agree with this scope of policies or not, what their thoughts are on some of our ideas and options, and I suppose most crucially of all, your thoughts on whether we've missed anything, whether we're not being ambitious enough, or whether we're being too ambitious. We're hosting a series of webinars covering the 5 different topics individually over the summer to help give you the chance to learn more about the topics and to ask questions that you might have. So today, as I say, is carbon reduction, but we'll also have flood risk, placemaking, green infrastructure, and sustainable infrastructure over the coming weeks with daytime and evening slots. And if you miss any, the recordings will be put on our website for you to be able to watch at your leisure. And just to say, in terms of the daytime and the evening slots, they are both the same session, so there's no need to attend both. They'll both be the same session, as I say. Also, we'd be grateful for any feedback. These are the very first webinars that we've hosted as the policy and plans section, and certainly for the local plan update. So if you have any feedback, constructive feedback for us, if you could email it to the address that you're seeing on your screen now, that'd be really helpful. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Dan, who's going to give our presentation today on the carbon reduction topic of the local plan update. So over to you, Dan.
Hi, thanks, Adam. So welcome to the carbon reduction webinar, which is part of the Leeds local plan update consultation. The webinar will cover the objective of this section of the local plan update, the local context in terms of carbon emissions, current national policy, the topic areas of the local plan update paper, and there will also be a brief introduction to each topic and the options presented in the consultation material. There will also be questions for you to consider And finally, please put any questions in the Q&A, as Adam described earlier. So our current local plan has effective policies on carbon reduction and renewable energy generation. However, they don't go far enough to make us carbon neutral by 2030, so we need to explore how we can go further. Our objective is to minimise energy demand and meet all demands for heat and power without increasing carbon emissions, to allow Leeds to meet its climate emergency commitment of being carbon neutral by 2030. We believe this can be achieved by new developments to measure carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of a building, sustainable construction standards for new buildings, and promoting renewable and low carbon energy to meet carbon neutral aspirations. To provide some local context, the table on screen shows that Leeds has seen a consistent drop in the levels of carbon dioxide emissions since 2005. There's been a 37% drop in total emissions within that period, including a 52% drop in the industry and 40% drop in the domestic sectors. However, these trends need to be significantly improved to meet local and national targets. Whilst this requires a multi-sector approach, planning policy can have a positive impact on the carbon emissions of industrial and domestic buildings. And the source of that data is from the government's local authority and regional carbon dioxide emissions statistics, the links on the slide. So moving on to national policy, the Planning Policy Act of 2008 puts a legal duty on local planning authorities to include policies on climate change mitigation and adaptation in their development plans. The National Planning Policy Framework, or the NPPF, states that the planning system should shape places in ways that contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, minimise vulnerability and improve resilience, encourage the reuse of existing resources, including conversion of existing buildings, and support renewable and low carbon energy and associated infrastructure. The following slides explore the policy options available to us in this local plan update. Whole life cycle carbon emissions. Our current planning policy approach is mainly focused on reducing operational energy use. In order to fully capture and understand the development's carbon impact across its lifespan, a whole life cycle carbon assessment is required. Whole life cycle carbon assessments, or embodied carbon, measure the carbon emissions resulting from the construction and use of a building over its entire life, including operation and demolition. It takes account of the following elements: construction products and processes, operation of the building, maintenance, repair, refurbishment and water use, demolition, waste disposal, carbon savings from material reuse. Guidance on this topic has been published by UK Green Building Council, RICS, and London Local Plan also includes a policy on this area. So the options presented in our scoping consultation require whole life cycle carbon assessments to be submitted in support of all major planning applications, or require assessments to be submitted until 2026, but after that date, require development to meet a set of benchmarks to achieve carbon neutral across the whole carbon life cycle of the development. So we have a couple of questions for you to consider, and I'll pause here for a few seconds to allow you to do so. Do you think that planning policy should seek to reduce the embodied carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of development? And do you think you have any further thoughts on whole life cycle carbon reduction, such as how quickly it should be used to achieve carbon neutral development, or whether all developments should be required to carry out assessments? So I'll just pause for a few seconds here. I'll move on now to operational energy carbon reduction. Operational carbon is the carbon emitted during the use of the building. The Planning and Energy Act of 2008 gives local planning authorities the power to set energy efficiency performance standards that exceed those required in building regulations. The Council currently has planning policy that goes further than national building regulations, and that's Core Strategy Policy EN1, which requires major development to be 20% more energy efficient than building regulations. It also requires 10% of the energy needs of development to come from renewable low carbon energy sources. We also have Core Strategy Policy EN2, which requires major commercial development to be built to the BREEAM Excellent standard. However, the requirement of those policies will not deliver the climate's emergency commitment to make the city carbon neutral by 2030. Schemes in Leeds, such as a greenhouse and lilac, show that developments that push towards carbon neutral are possible in Leeds. However, the options in our presented in our consultation material are as follows. Require all development to be built so that carbon emissions associated with the building's operational energy are neutral or negative. Gradually increase improvements in energy efficiency beyond the current 20% improvement, combined with renewable energy use to achieve zero carbon emissions in new development by 2030. Require the energy needs of development to come exclusively from renewable or low carbon energy sources, or use carbon offsetting to address any residual carbon reductions needed to achieve carbon neutral through financial contributions. So again, we have a couple of questions, which I'll pause on for a few seconds. Do you think we should require new development to achieve a zero carbon energy performance standard for the operational use of the buildings? Should developments still be required to include on-site renewable energy, as well as meeting energy efficiency standards? If so, what portion of the energy needs of development should be met by renewable energy? Okay, I'll move on to the next topic, which is sustainable construction. Sustainable construction concerns the assessment of how environmentally responsible and energy efficient a development is. Leeds wants all development to be built to a high standard across a whole range of sustainability measures. To achieve this, we've already adopted policy EN2 in our core strategy, which requires BREEAM Excellent for commercial buildings of a certain size. For those who may not know, a BREEAM rating is based on energy management, health and well-being, materials, transport, water, waste, pollution, land use and ecology, and the criteria are then scored and weighted and a BREEAM rating given. The assessments are carried out by independent assessors at the design stage and post-construction. We have also adopted the Building for Tomorrow Today Sustainable Design and Construction Supplementary Planning document to help developers design and construct sustainable development. The council uses its own LEED standard for its own council house building programme. It's been shown that the LEED standard dwellings can produce an average of 0.9 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year, compared against the average household of 6 tonnes per year. There are already several nationally recognised standards available, such as BREEAM, Home Quality Mark, and Passive House. So we move on to the options presented in the material again, which are require residential development to achieve a specific sustainable construction rating or standard, or create our own set of standards across a range of sustainable construction measures equivalent to Code for Sustainable Homes Level 6. And then a couple more questions here. Do you think that Leeds should set a standard for sustainable construction of new residential development? If so, do you think we should use one of the established sustainable construction rating systems, such as BREEAM Residential or Home Quality Mark, or create our own set of standards? Okay, I'll move on to our next area, which is resilience to heat. By 2070, the average summer day could be between 1.4 and 5.1 degrees warmer, leading to significant impact on people's health and well-being due to overheating. Heat stress occurs at temperatures over 35 degrees centigrade and can have an impact on productivity and an effect on sleep, which can lead to illness and also death, particularly in people over 65. There are no existing policies within the local plan that specifically consider the overheating of homes. However, building regulations consider this issue. So the questions are on this slide, and they are: do you agree that the local plan should contain a policy designed to increase resilience to the impacts of heat? And how do you think Leeds could ensure that homes are more resilient to overheating? I'll move on to the next area, which is renewable energy generation. National policy recognises the role of the planning system to support renewable and low carbon energy and associated infrastructure. Core strategy policy EN3 encourages investment in renewable energy and low carbon infrastructure. And the natural resource and waste plan sets minimum targets for installed and grid connected energy for each type of renewable energy. There's a target of 81 megawatts by 2021, and Leeds currently has granted consent for a total of 77.9 megawatts. Consideration should be given to us whether local renewable generation is the right option for Leeds, as projects such as a wind farm at Hornsea provide far more renewable energy than could ever be generated locally. However, local renewable energy generation helps Leeds to be more energy secure. It avoids inefficiencies associated with loss of energy during transmission, creates local jobs, and can provide opportunities for community benefits. As part of the local plan update, we're considering the following options. We've considered options for renewable generation, renewable energy generation Leeds, and the questions we have for you are: do you consider that Leeds should set targets for different types of local renewable energy generation? And do you have any views about where facilities for local renewable energy generation, such as wind and solar farms, should be located? I'll just pause again for a few seconds on that. I'll move on to heat networks. So Leeds City Council and its partners, Vital Energy, are constructing a heat network of underground pipes around Leeds City Centre. This reuses the heat produced from the recycling energy recovery facility to supply low carbon form of heat in the urban area to local homes and businesses. When complete, the network will connect nearly 2,000 homes and businesses, providing low carbon heat and water, equating to a saving of 11,000 tonnes of carbon emissions per year. Core strategy policy EN4 asks for developments to connect into the heat network where possible, and in areas that are far too away from the heat network, to create a new district heat network serving development. In most cases, the outcome is that developments are designed to be ready for connection to a future heat network, rather than being connected to existing or new network. We want to further encourage the use of heat networks by identifying the opportunities for new development to connect to them. This could be done through expanding on the existing policy through a supplementary planning document. The current network is shown on the following slide, and can be found within the consultation documents, which shows the existing heat network. So the question we'd like to ask you is, would you like to see more connections made to the heat network, or are there more effective ways to reduce emissions? And I'll move on to the last area, which is energy storage and distribution. Renewable energy can sometimes result in energy being produced when it's not needed and therefore can be lost. Storage has the following benefits: storage of renewable energy for use later. Storage of renewable energy for use later when it's needed, provide backup power when blackouts occur, and provide voltage stabilizations over grid balancing services. National Grid's future energy scenarios predict that 12 to 29 gigawatts of electricity storage could be deployed by 2050. It's very likely that Leeds will need to provide some energy storage within the district, particularly to help manage the supply that's generated from renewable energy generating facilities. In addition to electrical energy storage, the storage and distribution of hydrogen can play a key role in enabling the UK economy to achieve net zero. It can provide a source of energy for domestic heating, heavy transport, aviation, and industrial processes. According to Britain's hydrogen network plan, the planning system will need to be able to accommodate a large volume of applications for hydrogen production, storage, pipeline, and other facilities. The options presented in our documents are, whilst there's no requirement to set policies on energy storage and distribution, it may be considered beneficial to introduce policies that do so. Or we could identify suitable areas for energy storage, including hydrogen, without setting a target. And the questions for you to consider are: do you think that the new policy is required to guide the location of energy storage proposals, including electricity and hydrogen? And do you think that a target should be set for the energy storage in Leeds? So thank you for listening to that presentation. Again, comments will be made on the full consultation between 19th of July and 13th of September. You find more information on the links on the page. And now we can try and answer some of your questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was, I hope people found that a very informative presentation. So thank you very much. I can see that we've already got a few questions there, look like really helpful questions. And I also realized that I've made an unforgivable error in not introducing Caroline Harris, who is going to help us out on the Q&A. So I don't know, Caroline, if there's any questions that you wanted to pull out there that we've got so far.
I'll just start at the beginning, I think, so I don't get confused for the moment. First question, how do you define a major development?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and that's a governmental kind of definition. So that's essential a government definition, and it's basically any development that's over 10 houses. So any planning application that's more than 10 houses or more than 1,000 square meters of commercial space. So that's what counts as major development. And so anything below that, obviously by definition, it doesn't account for that. So something that's 9 houses, for instance, would be minor development.
Thanks, Adam. Do we have adequate forecasting tools to measure life cycle emissions and a common approach across all sectors? And if so, can the forecast be used to accept or reject a planning application?
I don't know if any of the panel wanted to come into this one. I'm happy to answer it unless anyone else had any responses they wanted to give. Okay, it's a really good question. And I think it's obvious, as Dan said in his presentation, this is a relatively new thing. There are methodologies that have been developed by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and that's what the London Plan has used in its new policy. But I think in planning terms, this is still quite new and cutting edge stuff in terms of understanding that full trajectory of carbon impacts, if you want to call it that. So I think that's something that we haven't looked at in full detail yet. And we're hoping, clearly through this consultation that people may flush out some of the answers to that and sort of suggest some of the issues with this and some of the solutions as well. I think one of the things that we've recognised when looking at what places in Sweden, Manchester and London have done is that because this is relatively new, and it's why we've phrased option kind of 1 in that section the way that we have, is to essentially for us to simply record the whole life cycle carbon emissions of a development in the early stages, to help us then perhaps later on down the line actually set targets. And that's a question that, as Dan went through, whether we should be setting targets right from the start and recognizing the issue of whether we have enough data to be able to do that, or whether we should use the first part of the plan to perhaps record this information, because we don't do it at the moment. So I think that data would be very, very, very useful.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, Caroline, just to interrupt. Just reverting back to the previous question about major and minor development. Clearly, if people felt that we had got it wrong in terms of only asking the question about major development, if people felt, in your consultation responses, if you wanted to say that actually you think this should be about minor development too, we shouldn't just be drawing a line there, then please let us know, obviously as part of your consultation responses. That's obviously clearly a very valid point of view. Sorry, Caroline, I interrupted.
No, that's fine. Thanks for that clarification. We have a comment that whole life cycle carbon emissions approach is excellent, but it has to be delivered across all 5 stages. And there is concern that the document seems light on tackling embedded carbon from the build stage. And if this is not addressed rapidly, Leeds will have a number of large developments currently in planning stage, which will make achieving our carbon neutral target impossible.
I'm happy to pick this one up, but I'll just give anyone on the panel the opportunity just in case they wanted to. So I'll just pause.
Hi Adam, just to come in there. I think we would agree that a whole life carbon cycle assessment does need to cover all 5 sectors, and the methodology that RICS have developed does that. We wouldn't be doing anything less than that. So I certainly agree on that point.
Thanks, Helen. I think the question is certainly correct to sort of flag up those concerns about making sure that it covers all aspects. And as you say, Helen, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors guidance does enable us to do that. But as I said in my previous answer, it is still relatively new. And I think as we see more planning applications come through the system, we'll hopefully be able to see how this is working. And it'll be interesting to see what the experiences are of London and Manchester once that's adopted, to see how that's implemented, and hopefully that will give us a steer in terms of how we can make that policy as effective as possible. But yeah, that's a really good point, and I think if you've got further thoughts on that, be great for you to expand them in your consultation responses. Caroline, back to you.
Yeah, I have a linked question. Do you have costs available for whole life carbon development to input into viability appraisals, or is this something you have yet to explore?
I'll see if anyone from the panels.
There are costs which have been done. Various agencies have calculated costs, and we've got general broad figures for costs to give us an idea of what we're talking about, but it's an area of work that we would need to look into more deeply. If this consultation shows that that's the way people think it should go, then we would have a lot more work to do to bring this forward into a more formal policy approach. But our early research into this, there are costs available. But I don't know that they're Leeds specific, so we would have further work to do on that.
Thanks, Helen. I think it's fair to say, isn't it? I mean, for those who are on the webinar who haven't been involved in planning policy formation before, viability is quite a big issue, and ensuring that whenever we have new policies, we need to ensure that they are viable for development, and that gets tested at what's called an examination in public, which we're a few stages away from at this point. We're at the very earliest stage of consultation, but following this stage, and then we will start to create more detailed policies, as Helen said. And I think at that stage we're going to need to be very clear in terms of the viability approach, as Helen says, making that lead specific, making that development specific, to understand what the cost implications are for whole life cycle carbon costs, but also a whole range of measures that are included in the plan. And as I said, that will be ultimately tested at the examination in public, and we will consult on that information as well. Sorry, Dan.
I've got something to add. I believe RICS also have some sort of building carbon database where people can input their data from their own projects for whole life cycle carbon, and you can explore the information in there, which helps those in the industry sort of understand the process and maybe the costs involved for that.
That's great, Dan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. We have another comment, because this is a very different approach from past planning approaches. What training is going to be provided for Leeds City Council officers across planning, housing and highways, and also what training may be offered for developers and small local builders to deliver sustainable design?
I think that's a really good question. I don't know if Martin, if you wanted to come in on this one, or happy to cover it myself if not.
No, I think I'll come in, Adam. Thank you for the invite, and Mick, you're right. I mean, we're in a very different place now as regards assessing development, and one of the things that the government wants to see through its revised planning reforms is a much more front-loaded planning system and a much simpler planning system, which would enable people to have a lot more understanding and security of knowledge about the type of development they're getting at a very early stage. So what we could see through the policies that we're developing here is a lot more prescription around what development standards should be at the plan making stage. And provided that we can do that in a way which is considered to be sound and deliverable by a planning inspector, it would be possible to test the type and the quality of those developments at that early stage and then see those rolled out, rather than have a bespoke approach per development, which would require individual assessments. Now, of course, we're not ruling that out at the moment, the council is seeking to get some energy assessment skills within the planning department to do just that. But certainly, if as you point out, this technically different part of the planning system requires a more standardized approach and upskilling, then that's something that we would really welcome you to say as part of your comments to this consultation. I think in terms of the difference between large developments and small local builders, I think that, again, that's a very well made point, because large developments, large developers and the volume house builders, for example, will set their model house design and replicate that out through developments, whereas smaller and local house builders may well build to specifications of clients or have different approaches. We've got good track record of working with small and medium enterprise, what are known as SME builders within Leeds, and we would continue to do that to ensure that these policies were achievable by a range of house builders across the city, because certainly within our city centre and our inner city areas in Leeds, we're finding that it's those SME developers who are actually doing quite a lot of the delivery of housing and development within the city.
Great, thanks, Martin. Did anybody else have anything to add?
Not from me, no. Thank you.
Okay. I have another question. It sounds like the heat network is currently quite small scale. How many new connections can it support?
That's a very good question, and the honest answer is that I don't know. I think the sort of quick answer is that we know that it can support more than it has at the moment. So I couldn't say for definite how many properties that is, or how many buildings that is. But we do know that there is capacity for that to increase at fairly at scale. Now, it's worth noting that this is the extent of the heat network is covered by what's called a local development order, and the council will probably be looking to go out to consultation on a new version of that, either later this year or early next, and that will provide a lot more information in terms of how big this could get. But there is data already out there which we can certainly provide in terms of how much carbon that's already saved in terms of the heat network. And as the LDO work progresses, that local development order, I'm sure it will capture what the opportunities are moving forward as well. So quick answer to that is I'm not sure about the exact number of properties, but we do know that it has got the scope to expand fairly significantly. And obviously the question is kind of asking you whether you think that's a good thing, and whether that we need more policies to support that.
So if I could just come in there, Adam, just to supplement that answer, I think the current heat network, which is known as Leeds Pipes, is providing for around 2,000 homes within a specific part of the city, and that's able to reduce carbon emissions by a substantial amount. So as Adam said, the question is how and where should we look to widen that within the city?
Great, thank you. This is the last question we've got at the moment, so if anybody else has any, please put them in the Q&A for us. Do you agree energy reduction is the priority above renewable energy generation?
I don't know if anyone on the panel. I've got a stab at that, but I'll just pause to see if anyone on the panel would like to answer first.
I'm happy to.
I'll have a go.
We all like this question, but I'll defer to Helen.
Well, I was just going to say that if the grid was all powered from renewable energy, then that'd be a great way forward for us. But we're not at that point yet, and we want to make sure that Leeds is doing all it can to generate as much of our own local renewable energy as possible, and there are good reasons for doing that. But until the grid is all renewable energy, then we still have to look for other ways of getting carbon emissions down, and also just having buildings that are more energy efficient is a better use of resources and a more sensible way for us to live. So I'm not sure I can agree with that point at the moment.
If I could just supplement that, I think it would be really helpful if we had some responses that maybe talked about an energy hierarchy, because we know that other local authorities, in Manchester, for example, do have policies on energy hierarchy where you would start with reduce before you actually got to looking at how you generated your energy on sites. And I think that's important, because what we don't want to be doing is we don't want to be storing up within buildings and buildings that maybe aren't as fabric efficient as they possibly could be now, a situation where in 10 or 20 years time we're finding we're having to retrofit those buildings that we're building now in order to be more carbon efficient. So I do think energy reduction is a very key issue to discuss alongside energy generation.
Yeah, I would agree that with everything that Martin and Helen have just said. I think, and clearly it's something that we would like to hear people's views on as part of the consultation. But I think, as Helen says, I think if all we deal with is the generation of new energy, but don't look at how we reduce demand, then we've really missed a trick, and we've put more pressure on the network than we needed to do. We've had to deliver more renewable energy, more wind turbines, more solar panels than actually perhaps was necessary. If we don't tackle some of the root causes of energy inefficiency in buildings, as Martin says, there's a huge missed opportunity there. And I think in terms of the powers that we have, in terms of new development, I think we've got a real opportunity here to help reduce that energy requirements almost at source. And obviously we can't solve a national picture in terms of the delivery of new renewable energy, but certainly at a local level, planning policies can have a real part to play. So I wouldn't necessarily want to give a strict yes/no answer to that very good question, but I certainly believe it shouldn't be one or the other. I think reducing carbon, reducing the usage of buildings, I think is such a huge issue as well.
Thanks very much for that, everybody. I've got a practical suggestion next. Could parked electric cars act as energy storage, given they're parked up 90% of the time, as well as charging up, they can give energy back to the grid? What do you think?
A very interesting suggestion. I don't know if anyone on the panel's got any thoughts on that.
To be honest,
Yeah.
I've not heard of that before, but I know we have a policy requiring a certain amount of electric charging points for new development. So, I mean, I don't know what Martin's going to say, but if you've got any further information on that, please put it in your consultation response. We've had sort of discussions about sort of batteries within house, sort of batteries for individual homes, but nothing about that, I'm afraid, unless Martin has anything else to add.
Yeah, it's this is something that I heard about quite recently, and I might be wrong in this, but I do wonder whether at the Climate Innovation District in situ in Leeds, they're actually looking at that, because there are a number of electric vehicles that they have within the Climate Innovation District, and certainly as the person asking the question there sets out, if you've got a large battery sat close to your house, then that would be very useful to be able to use that to provide low carbon and renewable energy at different points of the day. The key thing here being that this is about demand on the grid, and when the best time to draw on low carbon energy would be.
Thanks both. I suppose the only point I had on that one is, and this is quite a key part of this consultation as well, is the limits of the planning system. And we have to be upfront and honest about what the planning system can and can't do. And clearly the planning system in terms of these policies is largely related to new applications, new planning applications for new development, because that's where planning policies are used. It may be challenging. I'm certainly not saying it's not possible, but just off the top of my head, it may be challenging to structure policies that would say require that electric cars were provided, that then fed energy back into the grid. That might be something that we would have to think quite carefully about how that would work as a detail. But certainly as an idea of novel suggestions of how we can start to try and tackle some of this stuff, I think it sounds like a really exciting idea.
Thank you very much. Right, we've got an interesting one here. I am a novice in terms of planning and saving on emissions, and wonder how to conserve energy, as I live in a 1900 back-to-back house, of which there are quite a few around Leeds. Cannot avail of any grants to improve the situation because of the structure of the house. Any advice?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, it's sort of beyond the limits of, and you're absolutely fine to declare if you say you're a novice in planning, don't worry about that whatsoever. It's great for you to join us. The planning system can't really require that in terms of your access to grants, but I know that the other parts of the council, which Martin may be able to touch on, are working quite heavily in terms of trying to get grants to retrofit properties so that they become more energy efficient. I don't know what the options are for you as a sort of a private, as a private resident. I knew that periodically you do hear some schemes that come on about improving insulation. And there was the talk obviously earlier in the year about, I forget what the terminology was, but something like a green grant, where people could apply for funding to install things like ground source heat pumps and air pumps and things like that. I think the uptake was fairly low, unfortunately, not because of lack of people's interest, as clearly as your question proves, plenty of people are interested. But I think there was the system itself seemed a little bit. There was issues, I think, with its complexity and how many actual sort of builders and installers there were available to actually achieve it. But as I say, that the council is going through a process of trying to attract funding and bidding for funding to be able to retrofit properties across the district. But as you can imagine, there is a huge number of properties across the district, and that's a process that will take a huge amount of time and finance. Martin, I don't know if there's anything further to add on
that. I think that's right. And the Leeds Climate Commission, which set out the importance of planning for carbon neutrality by 2030, has highlighted that is a key response that's needed. but unfortunately, because the planning system deals with new development, the planning system can do little to deal with the retrofit of existing properties. But as Adam says, what the council is doing is the council's trying to attract a number of different funding opportunities. But the council's also continuing to have a dialogue with central government and with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority on ways that we can join up to progress this as a more formalised and certain approach to looking at the stocks within the Leeds at the moment. One of the things the council is doing is it's prioritising the retrofit of its own council housing stock, and certainly that council housing stock which Leeds has been now building in new dwellings for the past sort of 5 years is being built to a very high carbon efficiency standard. What I'd suggest you do is keep an eye on the council's leeds.gov.uk / climate change website, or climate website rather. I'll maybe copy that hyperlink and put it into the chat, because that details the sort of the non-planning efforts that the council's taking to deal with the climate emergency, which supplement those that have been set out here today.
Great, thanks, Martin. We have another question. Given there is a climate emergency declared in Leeds, how confident are you that the big changes needed will be made?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I think we have to understand, I suppose, that there are elements of this change that planning can kind of dictate, and there are other much larger, I dare say, cultural or societal changes that would need to take place. And I think for many of us who kind of obviously quite keen on this agenda, there's been a huge sort of push for this. I think there's been a huge amount of traction in the media about these issues. And unfortunately, I guess for every sort of tragic occurrence we see of wildfires or flooding, if there's one, there's obviously very few positives to take out of those awful situations, but if there is a positive to take out of those situations, it does highlight the importance of taking action. And clearly the council is very, very clear on its position that action does need to be taken. All I can say is that I hope, we all travel hopefully, don't we? I certainly hope that this will happen. We're trying to do our part in terms of having new planning policies. As Martin says, other parts of the council are looking at other elements that fall outside of the planning aspects. But yeah, we're certainly hopeful. I don't know if anyone else has any other views on the panel about that.
I think just to say that I think it's important that the council sets out the role of planning and this plan in terms of the big challenge that we've got in terms of our share of the global carbon budget. Now that we've set out today, a lot of that's going to be focused on low carbon buildings in terms of heat and energy. That's just in relation to new buildings, but as we've said, we're looking at improving and retrofitting that through sort of securement of funds to improve other buildings. But there's also a lot going on in terms of transport, which is the other big carbon emitter within the city. We have a Connecting Leeds strategy, which is looking to promote less energy intensive means of travel, such as by foot and by cycle, and other parts of this local plan update are also looking to respond to that by setting policies for things like 20-minute neighbourhoods. Within the council, we've also looking at the way we consume our food and our waste, but also within this consultation, we're looking at the importance of green infrastructure and nature and biodiversity to support the climate agenda. So I think having a local plan update that's focused on carbon and the climate emergency and pulling together lots of different strands of policy work that the council are currently doing is really exciting for me as a planner. I've been a planner for 20 years, and it's really heartening to now have the sort of the opportunity to pull together these radical policies around climate change. I think the other thing just to say, and Dan mentioned it earlier, is that the council does already have policies on climate change and carbon reduction, and it's had those in place for some time, and actually that's helped it deliver a 40% reduction in carbon emissions between 2000 and 2019. But because of the evidence and because of the updated evidence from the UN and the Intergovernmental Panel, we do realise that that isn't going to take us much further. So this is the point at which those radical changes need to occur. So the evidence is in place and the commitment is in place, and certainly planning, working with other parts of the council and other parts of the Leeds city and also the city region, put us in a good place to be able to aim to achieve these reductions.
Right,
Back to you,
thank you.
I think, Al.
Thank you. So the consultation material flags up BREEAM and RICS guidance. Which of these is preferred, and are long tick lists too bureaucratic an approach? Should we be more empowering people or supporting and reinforcing behaviour change instead?
If anyone on the panel's got a response to that, I'm happy to jump in.
Well, just as part of the consultation, I think it's interesting to get people's feedback on those who have used sort of BREEAM or these other standards for other projects, which, how they work. Do they work for them? Do they have any preference? So I think part of the consultation is for us to ask everyone what standards are working, or which ones would you like to see, or things like that. So I think regarding that, I think we referred to quite a few in the document, but just to sort of explore which ones work or which ones are preferable in the industry. So that section answers that. So.
Thanks, Dan. I think as well, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, that point about hearts and minds is obviously a really important one. But when we deal with a planning application, if we want and expect high energy efficiency standards, then we're going to need to clearly set that out. We can't just hope that the applicants will take that approach. We are going to need to quite clearly set out what is required. So I can completely understand the fear of kind of long bureaucratic lists, and it's certainly it's our kind of challenge, isn't it, to make sure that these things are clearly and easily read and understandable. But we will need to set out, if we are to achieve these aspirations, we will need to be quite clear about what is required, and that will need to be in a pass-fail sense. Otherwise these standards won't necessarily be adopted as part of new dwellings.
Thank you. On council housing, is it realistic for the council to adopt a standard such as passive house for any new build council housing, or would the intention be to wait for the local plan update to agree on the particular standard as mentioned?
I'm happy to come in there, Adam. Just
Sure.
to say that as I mentioned in my previous answer, the council already builds its council housing to a very high standard of carbon efficiency, and that's important because it's important so that the housing itself is affordable, but also for those occupants of that housing, in terms of energy bills and future running costs, those are reduced, and it makes the actual the running costs of housing cheaper as well. So it's a win-win in that respect. So the council can and will always look to do the best it can in terms of delivering its council housing programme. But once the policies are in place, they will look to not only the 500 or 600 homes, council homes, that the council is building in Leeds each year, but the 3,500 odd homes that are being built across the rest of the building stock within Leeds.
I think we've got one more question. Have we, Caroline?
Yeah, and I think we've kind of covered it, but we've got 2 minutes, so we'll just clarify. What will the plan say about empowering individuals to decarbonise and supporting and reinforcing behaviour change?
I think this is a tricky one, because again, it probably comes to the limitations of the planning system. What we're keen to do is set, high standards for new development to achieve, to help us get to net zero carbon by 2030. That doesn't mean, though, that we shouldn't still try and encourage behavioural change, and in a sort of softer sense, I suppose. What we've found, certainly in this early stage, is that, and this will hopefully come out through in the placemaking section, which is a webinar that's happening tomorrow, and if you can't make that, obviously you'll be able to watch it on YouTube, but about how, if you can design developments that make it easy for people to make environmentally friendly choices, that connect them to nature, that allow them to use active travel, then actually those behavioural changes can almost happen by accident. And we've found that in the admittedly small number of new developments that have come through, but we do see it happening. And so I think it's sort of a dual response almost, that if we can get really high quality development, that will help people to make those environmentally friendly choices. But it's just to be clear, it's not necessarily for a planning document to tell people how they should live their lives outside of kind of planning. So we wouldn't necessarily be trying to be too explicit on those kind of points. Martin, I don't know if you want to just pick up any on that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think the placemaking emphasis, which is running through the local plan update, which not only seeks to address carbon reduction, but create places that are resilient to the impacts of climate change, including urban heating, more nature-based solutions, rather than grey concrete infrastructure. Let's think about green infrastructure. Other parts of the consultation will look at the role of water, for example, within new development, and the role that new places have in terms of soaking up water and providing for water storage and what are called sustainable urban drainage systems. So I think Adam's right in that all of this comes together around places and new places to actually make people think about where they want to live and why places are designed in particular ways. That will be coupled with other things that the council can and will do around campaigns for behavioural change. Some of these things are known as they sort of sit outside of the sort of the direct carbon emissions that the planning system can control, but those sort of what are known as sort of part 3 carbon emissions are also on the council's plan and the Leeds Climate Commission's plan. So we should see more of that behavioural change and sort of campaigning side of things coming to supplement what we're doing through the local plan update.
That's great, Martin. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of the questions, and we've run to time there. So I think all that remains really is just to thank everybody for attending. Thank you to the panelists and to Dan for the presentation, and obviously the panelists for the answers. Caroline for managing the Q&A, but particularly for the attendees. It's been really, really useful for us to hear your views. We'd obviously encourage you to attend other webinars and to look at the material on our website if you haven't seen it already. Oh, we just got some feedback there, so thank you very much, and yeah, look forward to seeing you at the placemaking session. So I'm going to end the session there. So thank you very much to everyone, and enjoy